Have a seat on your porcelain throne. You're listening to the Powell Movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week I have Scotty Bob Morgan on the show. I know, you're most likely like, Scotty Bob Morgan? Who the hell is that? I don't listen to this podcast to hear about farmhands. But don't worry, this guest is worthy. I like to have guys from the base jump world on the show each year. Why? There's no real reason in particular, other than the folks I know that participate in these activities are all awesome dudes. And the best one in the world, in my non-educated opinion, is Red Bull Air Force team member Andy Farrington. I called up Andy, and I asked him who I should get on the show that has a great story from the world of base. Andy had no hesitation. He said, "You have to interview Scotty Bob." So I reached out to Scotty Bob, a guy who prides himself on traveling to almost every corner of the globe and jumping off shit. Scotty Bob has 4,052 skydives, 2,489 base jumps, and 1,350 wingsuit flights. And wingsuiting is really where he's made a name for himself. He steers clear of the spotlight and focuses on having fun and living his life like a gypsy, traveling the world, jumping off as many things as possible. Before we get into Scotty Bob's gypsy lifestyle, I want to ask you to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to me and follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement. Finally, I need to thank my great sponsors, which I hope you all support. They are Evo, Stanley, Spy Optic, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Now, let's talk to Scotty Bob Morgan. When did you get back?
About a week ago.
Okay, because we've been trying to do this podcast for months, and you left the country, and what were you doing? Give me a trip report.
We basically were bouncing all around the Alps, Slovenia, ended up in Romania at the tail end of it. We were just literally in a van and on the road for way too long. But we've been jumping, did a little bit of skydiving here and there, but mostly base jumping.
Were you planning on going for the whole summer? Because when we were talking, it didn't sound like you were leaving and not going to be back for a long time.
Yeah, it was a plan to stick around, but it definitely wasn't a plan to stick around as long as we did. It definitely kind of came out of left field.
When you travel like that, do you hotel it? Are you camping? Is it dirtbag style? How do you do it?
Been doing it for about 10 years now, at least the Europe side of things, and definitely developed a couple friends around the place. If we're not staying with friends, we were in a camper van with a German buddy of mine for like almost a month. That was mostly for Slovenia and Italy. And just find a spot, most convenient place to park the van and sleep for the night and just prepare for the next jump.
How old are you at this point?
33. Just turned 33.
And rumor has it that you may be getting married soon.
Yeah. We just set the date for probably the end of February.
How long have you been dating?
About a year.
And how did you ask her?
My mom laughed a little bit about that because apparently it doesn't fall far from the tree. It wasn't a big proposal or anything, but we've been dating long enough that the conversation just started springing up, and then both kind of looked at each other and said, I guess this means we're getting married. It was a very anticlimactic proposal, I guess, if that's the best way to put it.
It sounds very romantic.
Yeah.
And she's a badass just like yourself. Is she a sponsored wingsuit pilot as well?
She's been jumping for about 7 years. Very talented pilot. I wouldn't jump with somebody that wasn't heads up. So now that we're getting married, it's even more important. But yeah, I love flying with her.
Has your lifestyle changed at all since you had a girlfriend or been engaged, which is very recent?
Yeah, that's definitely taken a massive change. Especially in professional skydiving, base jumping world, you tend to be surrounded by a party all the time. And it's something we've talked about and maybe getting a little bit further away from as we get a little bit older. Trust me, I think I've partied enough for 100 people in 10 years. So it's something I'm kind of looking forward to is maybe a little bit more stability.
I've heard that you can go till 8, 10 in the morning, sleep for 8 hours, and then do it again. And that's kind of been your MO for the past decade.
Yeah. I've slowly realized in the last year, it's actually before we even met, something in myself. You know, it's been awesome, but change is a good thing. And she's thankfully a very good part of that change.
Did she party like you at one point?
Oh, yeah. See, we both definitely have outlived our party years for sure.
What do you think bothers her most about you?
That's a good question. It's definitely not the jumping. This is part of our lives and will be forever. But I don't know, that realization that you're actually making a commitment to be stable with someone and do a 180 in your life turn for, it's not really going to be a complete 180, but at least make massive changes in your plan to make sure you're planning with someone else.
Yeah, well, that was a little personal for the beginning of the podcast, but I should find out a little bit more about you. And you're from Woodbridge, Virginia, which is almost Washington, D.C. A lot of government and military families are based out of there. Was your family part of that growing up?
Yeah, my dad was in the Navy for almost 20 years. He got out a little bit early just because of some medical issues, and we've been on the road ever since. I grew up in Washington State. I was born near Seattle, Whidbey Island, and then we ended up on the East Coast and graduated high school there.
A military brat lifestyle growing up?
Yep.
Is it a pretty normal upbringing for you, other than traveling all the time?
I would consider it probably about as normal as you can get. I got a sister, and mom and dad are still together. They're in St. Louis, Missouri now, and it's probably about as good as a childhood anybody could ever want for.
You played hockey growing up. I think it was travel hockey and pretty serious. Were you good?
I think my dad liked to think so, but once I got into like my high school years, it kind of fell by the wayside. As I kind of grew through high school and my interest in competitive sports went down.
Speaking of growing through high school, that's something you really didn't do. You were like a teeny kid in high school, right?
Yeah, for sure. I graduated high school and I was about 120 pounds.
How big are you now?
I like flutter between 150, 160 now, depending on how much hiking I'm doing.
And I come from the DC area as well. And for me growing up, if you had a fake ID, you could go downtown and go to bars and buy booze. Was high school like that for you at all?
Definitely not. I was a little bit more controlled as a kid. I barely ventured out of Northern Virginia. Kind of lived the suburban kid lifestyle.
So you decide to go to the Marines. You've already done a little bit of community college, and you decide the Marines is the next step for you?
Yeah, it was a very bad semester of community college with me. My mom would call it not fully engaging myself. The best way I could put it is not going to class and not really caring about what was being taught to me. So I was 18 years old and didn't really know what I wanted to do. I didn't really see a point in college if I didn't know what I wanted to do, and there was a war on, and Marine Corps sounded like an adventure. I went for that.
Do you have to go to Parris Island?
I went to NCRD San Diego.
Is Parris Island tougher than that one, or are they the same?
I guess people that went to Parris Island would like to say that, but I don't think so. The word is Parris Island has a lot of bugs. NCRD San Diego has a lot of mountains. Usually your San Diego guys are much better hikers, and your Parris Island guys can deal with bugs a lot better.
Okay. And is that just miserable?
I mean, boot camp really wasn't that bad considering what I thought it was going to be. Granted, I was 18, almost 19 years old, and I assumed it was going to be a butt kicker because that's what everybody had told me. But once I got through it, I wanted to be there, so it wasn't that big of a deal.
Is there any hazing that goes on?
I mean, I wouldn't call it hazing. It's a touchy term, I would say. It's just, if you want to be a Marine, you got to prove yourself. So that's kind of what boot camp is all about. And I wouldn't consider it hazing. I would say it's just a rite of passage. That's what boot camp is.
You went to static line jump school and you were jumping out of planes, and that's kind of how you found your role in the military. And it sounds like the job that you took in the military has you shooting more people than anybody. Were you a photographer? Yeah, I was. I was a combat cameraman. Somehow ended up in that MOS. It's strange how I ended up there, but it took me a lot of places by absolute chance. Going to jump school came from just being attached to a reconnaissance unit my first year of being in. And for some reason, they felt it necessary to send me to jump school. So I was like, well, I'll take it and run with it. It's pretty incredible how that one thing of me by chance, because not a lot of camera guys go to jump school. I think I was the only one. Being the only Marine camera guy with jump wings kind of stands out every once in a while. And it definitely made a massive impression on me. Yeah, it's like one sergeant or one someone in the Army or Marines or whatever you're in, I don't know the hierarchy there, makes the decision to put you in that school. And yeah, your life direction changes forever.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I actually re-met the guy who actually got me that slot. He's still in the Marine Corps, and I randomly run into him at a skydiving boogie on the East Coast. We just happened to be sitting in like a trailer somewhere, and I was like, I remember you from somewhere. And it was like, that's like 2 lives ago. And I just started talking. I was like, holy cow, you're the reason I'm here.
That's amazing. Eventually you have to go to war. I mean, that's the deal. You get in the military. I'm sure that shit gets really real, really fast, more scary than anybody can possibly imagine. When you get dropped off there, what's the initial experience in Iraq?
So my first deployment, I think I was boots on the ground, I think in April of 2007. And I was a Lance Corporal at that time. And being a photographer for line units, you're basically a permanent attachment, which basically means you're kind of like the new guy everywhere you go. So you're bouncing between units all over the place. I was in a place called Camp Takatum, just outside of Fallujah. Yeah, it's an experience for sure.
Are they dropping you right into some shit and you're taking photos of it all?
I mean, by the time I was there, the war had changed, especially in Al Anbar province. It really changed to a lot less kinetic. War is mostly IEDs and some mortars and nothing crazy. Me personally, I know a lot of my friends that saw a lot more than I did, so I can't really claim that I saw the shit, if that's the right word for it, but definitely get a few hair-raising situations here and there, but nothing too crazy.
Is that something that when you're 20 years old, you're actually looking forward to getting dropped off in the shit, or are you happy just sitting in a bunker waiting?
That's the reason why I joined the Marine Corps. Was I didn't join it to sit in the ground and sit in a base, but I definitely tried my hardest to make sure I was out there as much as I could, because that's why I wanted to be there. And I got out my fair share. In 2 deployments, I basically saw almost every corner of the country. Traveled a lot more in my second deployment in 2009. It literally went from Basra to Nineveh to Mosul. Literally went around the whole damn country. It was a really cool experience. Looking back on it, there's probably not many guys that got to see that breadth of experience, but it's the job, and the MOS makes you travel a bunch.
Sounds like fun. A little sightseeing all over Iraq.
At one point, it definitely felt like that. We were basically doing stuff for the Iraqi army. So, I've got a camera in my hand constantly, and I was like, definitely feel like I'm literally sightseeing a war zone right now. It's pretty crazy.
What does a civilian not think of that really just sucks about being at war? Like, what are the modern conveniences that you don't have that you're like, fuck, I just want hot coffee?
The guys that did the initial invasion and even the push in Fallujah, those guys, they had the worst of it. By the time I got there on Al Assad, there's a freaking Burger King on base. And for me, that was kind of weird. I'm like, I'm in a war zone and there's like a Burger King on base. This is weird.
Yeah, it is pretty crazy.
But, I would say the biggest thing is just being away for that long. We did 13-month pumps because we were attached to the MEF, which is the Marine Expeditionary Force. So we were in theater for my first deployment. I was there from April till February of the next year. And then my second deployment, I was there from January to January. So it was full 12 months. They let us take a 2-week leave in the middle of there. And again, by happenstance, I had my base rig mailed and I went to Europe and went base jumping on my 2 weeks of leave, my second deployment. I had a great time. It was awesome.
After your first deployment, you go home. I would think you have a bunch of money because you're away for 13 months getting paid and you're on the government's dime when you were there, so you could live like a rock star. But you're bitten by the skydive bug and you end up living pretty much at the drop zone, jumping 120 skydives in 3 months or something like that.
Yeah, that's actually spot on. Where are you getting your facts from, man? It sounds like you know me more than me.
I might by the end of this. We'll see. But are you living at the drop zone then and just a total dirtbag?
I hadn't gone full dirtbag yet. When I got back from the first deployment, I knew I was going back, but definitely went full on with the skydiving at a local drop zone close to Camp Lejeune and jumped a bunch there. And at that point, I'm still 22 years old. I don't know what the hell I want to do.
Have you started base jumping yet?
I started base jumping about 5 months after I started skydiving. Yeah, my first base jump was Bridge Day 2008. And I guess in the span of the sport, I guess maybe a lot of people would hear that and be like, wow, you started way too early. And yes, I did. But when you're jumping all the time and you feel as current as you are, and I definitely, as an instructor these days, I would tell people never to do my progression because it was really ridiculous.
Everyone I've had on this podcast has a progression like yours, says it's not the way to do it, and it just happens that way. But yes, you guys are professionals for a reason, and you were confident with your gear. not everybody should do that. You should do the proper number, which I would never do. I don't even know what it is, but whatever. So you're base jumping at this point, and you also do a second tour of duty. So you do that in 2009, I think you were saying. Is that a choice, or is that something that you have to do for the military?
Well, my whole unit was going right back over for a full year, and I had to actually extend my contract. The choice was for me, I was base jumping, skydiving, and having a blast, but at one point thought I was going to re-enlist and still didn't really know what I wanted to do. But the choice that was given to me was either I stay in country for my last year of service and, sit on base in Lejeune and basically rot until I get out, or I could extend my contract and go to Iraq for 13 months for a second pump. And I chose that just because, I'd rather be with my friends and at least see them through another deployment. At least I'd be getting out with a ton of money. That was the other thing of mine. And at that point, I'm looking at this extremely expensive hobby that I just got myself into. And I'm like, well, I think Iraq again is probably the best bet.
When you go on that second tour, you had mentioned it earlier, but I'll talk about it again. So you go on that second tour, you get leave for 2 weeks, and this is where life really changes in a big way for you. Instead of going home and seeing family, you head to the mecca of base jumping, Lauterbrunnen. At this time in 2009, it is a different place. And first, what made that place so special back then?
It could have been the fact that I'd been in Iraq for 6 months, 7 months at that time, but I remember taking the train into the valley the first time and just sticking my head out the window and just being like, oh my God, this place is heaven. Not only being the most incredibly beautiful place on the planet, still is to me one of the most beautiful places I've ever been. I remember it making a very massive, awe-inspiring impression when I first came in the valley, having no clue how much time I would spend there over the next 10 years. If you've never been, if anybody has ever been, that place just brings you to your knees the first time you get there. And spent a week and a half jumping there and really doing things that in retrospect I would never do these days, but really just kind of figuring out terminal base jumping off big cliffs. And it was a pretty awesome trip.
It sounds like back then it was one place, but it sounds like the change has been that it's turned into more of an après ski type environment instead of maybe calculated base jump environment. Have you felt that as well, or is that just what I'm hearing?
The sport has changed. The entire activity, for me personally, has changed. But even back then, places like Lauterbrunnen, it was a madhouse. There hardly was any formal training out there or any professional, semi-professional training out there. It literally was people figuring out what the sport has kind of become today. Wingsuits were so basic. The technology was absolutely lousy at the time, comparison to nowadays, and it was a lot of guessing and a lot of trial and error. The valley itself, in my opinion, was way more dangerous back then than it is now. The sport in general might be more dangerous now, but that place in particular has gotten safer, in my opinion.
Now it is time for me to take a quick sponsor break. My first sponsor is Evo, and if you haven't been to Evo's stores in Seattle, Portland, Denver, or Whistler, or visited their website, evo.com, you are missing out on the best deals in action sports and beyond. Evo has something for everyone in the family, and they always have a great sale going on. They carry all the best brands in bike, surf, skate, wake, ski, and snowboard, and have all the clothing and outerwear you'll need for your adventure, or just to look great when it's time to head back to school or the bar. Right now, you can find some great end-of-season deals on bikes and surfboards, and check out all the new ski and snowboarding gear that's hitting the floor daily over at Evo. Evo offers free shipping on orders over $50, a low price guarantee, and a no-hassle return policy. Please support the show by buying everything you need from Evo. My next sponsor is Stanley, another iconic Seattle brand that has been ahead of the curve since 1913. While we all know Stanley for creating that iconic green bottle that kept your grandpa's coffee hot all day long, they still do that and a lot more these days. They still are all about adventure. They still are all about keeping your beverages hotter or colder than any other product ever created. And they have always been the right choice when it comes to the planet. If you are still using single-use plastics for your beverages, it's time to make a change for the environment. And now I'm making it easier than ever to do that. You can save 30% on all Stanley products when you head on over to stanley-pmi.com, buy some stuff. When you check out, Enter the code POWEL, the number 30, that's all one word, and you're done. I should also mention that when you buy from Stanley, you are also supporting cool projects like this podcast and the new movie from Matchsticks Productions. Those are my sponsors. Now we will jump back into the podcast. On that first trip, you did what a lot of people do. You head to whatever the bar is named that the base crowd pretty much flocks to, and you were going to find someone to show you around Lauterbrunnen. And who do you find?
The first 3 people I met were a friend of mine named John Van Horn. He's now passed. Sean Carriage, Kiro, is a New Zealander, Kiwi. He's dead now. And Nick Sacco, who's still a really good friend of mine. And Eddie Gaio would be the 4th guy. Eddie was a South African jumper who's still around, actually. Have to actually mention that. He's, and at that time, was pretty much the guy in the valley. He was the guy flying the fastest and the farthest in a brand new V3. And me being a 21-year-old guy straight from Iraq with no tracking gear and basically zero terminal experience, all 4 of them kind of took me under their wing and showed me around and made sure I didn't die. So I'm eternally grateful for those guys.
Is that common in base jumping where people will take you under your wing like that? Because it's a different sport or activity or whatever you want to call it than a lot of other things. And it seems like people have mentors and that's really how you learn how to do these things.
Yeah, especially back then. It was much more mentor based and it was who you chose to jump with spoke a lot about how you wanted to be as a person and a jumper. Nowadays, when there's much more formal instruction and people paying for courses, back then you kind of picked who you resonated with and that's who you learned from. If you could tolerate each other's company, it was more important than how much money you're paying to get a course.
How many jumps do you get in that 2 weeks in Lauterbrunnen?
I think I did about 35 jumps.
Wow.
We went back to Lauterbrunnen even afterwards. I went from Lauterbrunnen and then my girlfriend at the time met up with me and we went bombing around Europe. Went to Rome and Paris, a few other places, but I had like 3 days before I had to be back at the airport in Zurich, and I ended up going right back to Lauterbrunnen because I really wanted to jump some more. So I ended up getting, I think it was like 30 jumps, 35 jumps.
So you're fully hooked at this point. It's like what you want to do with your life.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Then you have to go back to Iraq, and then when you get done with that second tour of duty, is it back to the DC area, base jumping all the buildings on the eastern seaboard, and then eventually leaving the military?
Yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it. I thought at one point I wanted to re-enlist in the Marine Corps and join MARSOC and be an operator and everything. I had ideas of doing that, and a couple friends kind of talked me out of that. Well, also I talked myself out of it after I injured myself on a jump.
What happened?
Jumping a grain silo in North Carolina. Definitely the lowest jump I'd ever done yet, but it was like 180 feet. Just had a hard landing, just not knowing what the hell I was doing. And basically gave myself a really bad ankle sprain, and I was 2 weeks away from going to MARSOC selection. And I was like, this is not going to go well. I'll probably drop. So at that point, I'm like, well, I'm not doing MARSOC anymore. I guess I'm going to take my EAS, and started thinking about what I wanted to do and decided on moving back up to Northern Virginia because I had a bunch of friends still up there. And there was a drop zone, Skydive Orange, still one of my favorite drop zones in the whole world. Started working there and going to school at George Mason.
You go to ASU after that?
Yeah, so I do about 2.5 years in Northern Virginia. School was going okay. I was pretty dead set because it was my money at that point in time and my GI Bill. I was at least passing, and at this point I'm base jumping like every night with a good friend of mine, Ian Mitchard. He was in school at nursing school at University of Maryland, and I was down at GMU. And even in class, we'd just be sending notes to different stuff we wanted to go jump at night. We'd be in class in the day and then base jumping every night. At that point, I kind of was like, yeah, I could keep going through this. I was taking an Arabic language program, and I was spending a lot more time at the drop zone than I was up at school. And jumping was becoming much more of my lifestyle. And all the programs for Arabic linguist school was, I'm going to end up working for the State Department or XYZ lettered agency or whatever. And I'm like, man, if I get arrested base jumping, I'm going to lose my clearance. I'm going to basically be useless in what I do. And I'm like, do I really want to quit base jumping? I was like, no, I definitely don't. I think around that time, I was like, well, base jumping's giving me much more out of my life than any future in government work or whatever. And I started being a little bit more risky in my jumping, I would say. I was jumping a lot more buildings and just doing more and more and more, I eventually injured myself pretty good.
How do you injure yourself pretty good? Because you had an injury before where you hurt your ankle. And when I hear injury and base jump, it's usually not good.
I jumped off of a 750-foot antenna around 2 o'clock in the morning. It was like 2 days before Christmas. And I was already transferred to ASU. I literally had my car packed to move to Arizona to start school there, and broke my back and my leg, pulverized my back and broke my leg. Just pulling a little bit too low and having a little bit too much fun, and ended up in the hospital for a month. You know, in retrospect, that made me slow down quite a bit. I think I'm, again, very lucky to have walked away from that injury, but it definitely has taught me a lot of lessons about how far you can push it and also how much you let other people or your own ego talk you into doing things that you probably shouldn't be doing.
Dude, when you're in your 20s, you're a different type of person. You talk to any base jumper now that I know, they're all in their 30s and they talk about being super calculated, but then you can bring it back to, hey, remember when you're in your 20s and you were a little bit looser and taking a lot more risks, and they all laugh and they all did a lot of stupid things, and luckily a lot of them are still here, but there's just things that you're not going to do at your age now that back then you didn't even think about it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It was a hard lesson, but definitely one worth learning.
Is that the dumbest thing you've done when you look back, or are there dumber things?
I would say that was the most catastrophic dumb thing.
Well, that had a consequence.
But that's learning a lesson from injuries like that, or even poor decisions. Is I've definitely made dumb decisions in the past, but gotten away with it.
Yep.
And the trick is to identify the ones that you got away with and don't repeat those ones as well. Just because you got injured on one doesn't mean you shouldn't have gotten injured on other stupid decisions.
Yeah. And how about all the law breaking that you were not a part of? Were you ever caught for that?
I got in trouble for that one. That definitely contributed to my need and want to move west. Was definitely ran in some trouble with the law, but all trespassing charges and simple stuff. But if I was going to continue into base jumping and making that a priority in my life, which I was at that time was definitely interested in doing, I couldn't continue racking up an arrest record. So I got busted twice and figured that was enough for my East Coast thing. I think my judge in the second trial literally just was like, this is a second occurrence. This is going to be some serious stuff if this ever happens again. I was like, oh, buddy, I need to get out of here. Because at that time, I decided to leave the East Coast and go to a place that at least had some legal base jumping.
Is that when you start getting into wingsuiting, when you move out west, or has that already started?
I was flying small wingsuits a lot at Skydive Orange at the drop zone. I was really kind of getting more and more into wingsuiting. It definitely became a priority before I moved west, but after I moved west, skydiving-wise, that was all I was into.
2014-15, I think, is when you dedicate your life to proximity flying. For the person who doesn't know anything about this, I describe it as getting really close to shit and not hitting it. Is that kind of correct?
I'd like to quote my friend Noah Bonts. It's the art of chasing your shadow, but never touching it.
Okay. There was a small window in proximity flight where you were ahead of everyone else. At least that was the perception from people. And did you have a better understanding, or were you just going out there testing new things and saying, fuck it?
I wouldn't say if I was any different than anybody that was jumping a lot back then. It was a totally different era. The sport, again, has totally changed from now to then. And 2013, 14, 15, everybody was saying, fuck it. We were writing checks we couldn't cash, myself included. I'll freely throw my name in that hat. I definitely got lucky a few times, but I would like to think I learned from those lessons. A lot of my friends didn't. And that era of wingsuiting, I think we'll go back in time, and that was literally the dark ages. It was like medieval times where the stuff we know now, or we think we're kind of figuring out these days, we had no idea what the hell was going on back then. So we all learned a lesson. For the guys that at least are still alive from that era, the stuff we were doing back then was really cool. And it was blowing people's minds. And I think all the publicity and press and stuff, some guys kind of got addicted to that and that fame idea. And as I kept doing it, I slowly started realizing, as you know, the body count started rising, that a reckoning was coming. And if I wanted to continue doing this and at least promote this and keep it in my life, then we really needed to figure out why those things were happening, and at least figure out some basic science, or at least try to figure out what the hell is going on, rather than living by that huck it and fuck it mentality.
It seems like there was two schools of thought there. There was one school of thought, which was everyone's flying higher drag, lower speed, Or I don't know. But the way that you do it is what? Lower drag, higher speed?
It's more of like, especially wingsuit base jumping at that time, a lot of the accidents in those days were due to people that watched me be 5 feet off the deck and hauling ass. Like, people would be like, that's super dangerous. And I'm like, well, majority of the accidents of those day and age really were guys that were flying much higher, but they were way slower. And they would fly themselves into corners or pockets of the mountain that they couldn't get out because they weren't fast enough. For me, I started realizing that if I just make all my lines a lot steeper and I don't try to explore like high glide sides of the mountain, because that's where people get into trouble. From a layman's perspective, if somebody was looking at what I'm doing, they'd be like, wow, that's super dangerous. He's so close to the ground. I'm like, yeah, but I'm hauling ass. I can get out whenever I want. I'm also never going to fly myself into a part of the mountain that is going to kill you. So in that day and age, I would try to explain that to them and they'd look at me like I was crazy. But I guess the difference is I'm still here.
And that's how it happens, is the person that has the innovative technique that is looked at as crazy becomes the norm. And in your sport, yeah, a lot of guys don't live to see what the norm's going to be, but you figure out by having that higher speed, you can get yourself out of places that they can't. And that's the way that you need to do it as safe as possible. And that has been adopted as the way to fly a wingsuit these days, right?
Yeah, it's really good to see people, I would say, attacking more, being a lot steeper in their lines. It's kind of funny this summer. I've actually been chilling and searching for places out on like that I haven't really looked for on the mountain, but I feel like learning those lessons early on is really important for somebody that wants to get into this type of stuff, is that you don't need to be 5 feet off the ground, but you need to be going fast. You need to have airspeed. And I'll even say that the wingsuit designs changed rapidly, especially my first 3 years, that suits were able to actually maintain a lower stall speed. That happened like my third year of jumping. And I remember an older jumper in the room being like, well, you know, this is going to kill a lot of people because people are going to get comfortable flying slow. And that's exactly what happened. And seeing that no matter what suit you're flying, you just need to have your airspeed up, and it forces you to narrow your focus into specific parts of the mountain that aren't going to trap you.
Is the trial and error on figuring all that out pretty scary?
Yeah, I would consider my first 5 years, even my first 6 years of base jumping, majority of it was trial and error. It wasn't until 3-4 years ago that I started coming up with ideas and putting it into practice, but it's definitely terrifying, especially when people are dying around you. That was probably the scariest reality ever, was the first 2 years of really hitting it hard in a wingsuit. I was on, 1 fatality load, and then the next year I was on 3, and the next year I was on 5, and then it's like, holy crap, like, this is getting real.
You're 33 years old. How many people do you know that you've met in person to have passed?
I can't even really put a number on it, but to me, it's really less about the numbers. Where it really, truly hit home for me was when it started to become very close friends, like brothers.
Yeah.
The number one being Matt Kenny is probably the worst. I started teaching him and mentoring him when I'd been jumping for about 4 or 5 years at that point. But from day one of his jumping career till he died, like, we were inseparable, basically.
Man.
Yeah, losing him, that was the giant wake-up call to really step back and think about what I was doing. And not only that, but like what kind of energy I'm putting out. So whatever people are following what I'm doing, and I'm had to make some changes.
How many times have you been there when it's happened?
10, 12 times at least. I don't have like a thing on my wall of like
no.
tallies.
But if it was 2, you'd be able to be like, it happened twice and it was terrible. But in your sport, everybody's got a plan B in their jump. They should. And if plan B doesn't work and something happens, it's catastrophic. It's not, I broke an arm, unless you're named Super Friendship.
Yeah, that's the reality Hartman always tells people is, you get a lot of guys coming from other sports, especially skiing. And basically his line is, just imagine that this is the fastest ski run you ever do. And if you crash, you're going to die.
Yeah.
100% of the time. And it's pretty cool to see. There's been at least 3 confirmed cases of people actually have rode one in and lived. Still, we try to be like, well, you shouldn't do that.
Yeah, totally. Do you have life insurance?
Hell no, I do not have life insurance.
Okay, just checking. Now it is time for me to get into my final set of sponsors, and I'm going to start with Spy Optic. Spy has spent the past 25 years innovating the sunglass game But more importantly, they've spent 25 years making you look good. The artists, athletes, and designers over at Spy not only live and breathe the action sports lifestyle, they like to party and try new things. And the newest of new is the 50/50 collection. Spy took the iconic frames, the Flynn, Discord, Cyrus, and Helm, and took their bottoms off. Literally. They stripped down these popular frames, leaving them semi-rimless and ready for some action. It's an awesome upgrade to the glasses I already love. And if you wear sunglasses and listen to this podcast, support me, save some money, and make yourself look good by heading over to Spy Optic, pick out some sunglasses. I highly recommend the Helm 50/50. Head to checkout and save 20% by entering the code POWEL20. That's all one word and the number 20. My final sponsor is the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. They have been brewing my favorite Northwest beer since 2006. And since they started brewing beer, they've been supporting the sports we love. If you aren't sure about what they've done in action sports, well, I'll tell you. They're the first beer brand to produce their own ski and snowboard movie. They support a team of A-list athletes. They throw a series of hella big air events. They have signature beers that donate to causes like Protect Our Winters. And they are supporting the big Proving Grounds Rampage qualifier in Bend this September. If all of that isn't cool enough, the people that work at 10 Barrel, they're all skiers, snowboarders, and bikers. And if you want to find out a lot more about the company and what goes on behind the scenes, well, they have their own podcast, Fully Aligned, and it's available wherever you get your podcasts, and it'll make you think a lot more about what you drink. Next time you head to the store, make sure you buy the beer that supports action sports. Pick up a 6-pack of 10 Barrel. Those are my sponsors, and now we will jump back into the podcast. Death happens in your world. Do you ever think about it? Does it ever hit your head at all when you're getting ready to jump something? Or is it totally phased out and you're totally in the moment? It doesn't matter.
No, I still get nervous. I'd say I get more nervous when I have other things that I'm thinking about, especially now when I'm getting married and I start realizing all the things I have to lose.
Is she pregnant?
No, she's not pregnant. It's just the reality of after going through the whole thing with Matt and his family, and his family is pretty much my family, and you quickly realize that the guy that goes in is kind of the selfish one, really. Like it's all the other people that have to deal with it afterwards. That's the hard part. The people that are still here, not just in the immediate sense, but the long-term sense, that's the heavy stuff. And for me, I'd hopefully think I'm going to see this through till well into my elderly years, but it makes you stop and think every time you jump, if you got a clear head and doing it for the right reasons.
The old, wise Scotty Bob.
I'm still 33, man. I got some time.
The older, wiser Scotty Bob. How do you make money in the sport?
It's been a gradual process of figuring out how I'm going to pay for all this stuff, but I ended up getting a tandem rating. I did the tandem skydiving thing for 3 years.
Baby Bjorn and people?
Yeah, and honestly, being a tandem master taught me so much about decision making and reaction control. And I strongly urge any and all skydivers, especially people that have an attitude of being like, I never want to chuck tandems ever. And I'm like, dude, I'm pretty sure I've saved myself from serious injury just from skills that I learned being a tandem master. And you get to hang out with people like all day, which I like doing.
Okay.
But did tandems for a while, then moved down here to Southern California and pretty much teach wingsuiting full time. I'm very, very lucky to have the job that I have now. I basically am afforded the luxury of doing exactly what I want to do and honing my skills while I get to teach other people.
So you make money not through social media and videos and sponsorship. You make money by actually doing work, and then you have sponsors on the side as well?
Yep. I've really kind of looked at the whole YouTube thing, and it never seemed like a good way to make money and also not lose your soul.
Yeah.
I had a lot of friends that went full-fledged into the social media and YouTube world, and it's mind-numbingly silly. I'm not talking shit on some of my friends, but it's not for me.
To each his own. You get a guy like Miles who's super energetic and wants to be out in front of the camera all the time. That works for him. For you, not so much.
Well, I mean, I'll definitely do film jobs, and I hope Miles doesn't think I love Miles. He's my hero. But I got no problem being in front of a camera and being energetic, but full-time posting videos for certain things, that's not what I'd really like to focus on.
So we're not going to see Scotty Bob's World, the webisode series, come out anytime soon. And you don't have the big energy drink sponsorship, which some guys have. You do have Squirrel Wingsuits and Kavoo, who sponsors you?
Yeah, Kavoo Clothing based out of Seattle. They're awesome.
Leah Evans is getting married. She's one of their designers.
Hell yeah. Hi, Leah. They're literally a big family from day one with them. It's been awesome. Even through the patches of wingsuiting that wasn't very friendly with sponsorships and relationships with companies, but they saw us through, and I'm just honestly honored that they even have the faith to believe in me. So definitely give them a shout out. They're awesome.
And on the Squirrel side, I heard a weird thing that they were able to update your Tinder profile back when you were single, and that was part of the deal.
Yeah, I might get in trouble for that one. Yeah. I think it was mostly some of the guys in the company having a little bit of fun with me still being single.
Did you get to have fun with that?
I was having enough fun in those days for 20 people. I definitely don't look back at those and frown at all.
When you look at yourself, you're about to get married, you're 33 years old, you want to be doing this for a long time. And in your world, is it just teaching people how to wingsuit fly and that's how you can do that? That's going to be your career?
That's what I love doing right now. Where it goes from there, we'll see. Definitely would entertain the idea of getting more into traveling, doing more traveling camps. We did a couple in Thailand last year, and being able to take the sport and be able to travel it a little bit would be a lot of fun, at least the instructional side.
And how do you justify your activity to all the people that think you're crazy? I'm sure it's conversations with mom and dad when you're younger because they probably think their son's Scotty Bob. And is that your name, Scotty Bob?
It's not my real name.
Okay.
No, my mom would kill me if I said that. No, they're cool with it. My dad was in the Navy for 20 years, a pilot. The flying gene runs in the family, so this was kind of a way to keep in the family name, I guess. My grandfather was a pilot in the Air Force. Uncle was a pilot. Once they figured out that I wasn't going to fly jets in the military, once I started doing this, they're like, okay, that's okay.
But how about the other people? Because I'm sure there's people that judge you based on what you do and think you're selfish, adrenaline rush, young, dumb guy who just wants to jump off shit.
At least I'm not doing heroin on the street. That's the way I look at it. I think everybody deep down inside has an urge to challenge themselves or at least get some adrenaline going, and having a good outlet for that energy is a good thing in life. At least that's what I tell myself. But if it wasn't this, I would be doing something else. I keep telling people if I was on a motorcycle, I'd probably be dead by now. But for me, this is what I like doing, and I just like the people around me to know that at least I'm putting some thought into it. It's not all silly and crazy and as insane as it might seem.
At this point, you're an authority on the sport a little bit. You've really helped change the way that things are done. What's the dumbest thing that you've seen somebody do? And nowadays, do you take the position where you tell people they're idiots when they're being idiots?
I call it the sheriff role. I've gone through multiple phases of that. I for sure have seen some really poor judgment in other jumpers, but before I say anything, I typically try to put myself in their shoes a little bit to be like, yeah, I was dumb too. You know, I've done my fair share of really dumb stuff in the past. And if it's not a like, this guy's going to die very soon if he keeps doing it, I usually will leave it to the bar. You know, we'll go to the Horner and chat rather than being like up in someone's face. Because I learned really quickly that getting in someone's face when they're doing something you think is stupid, it never gets you anywhere good. It just makes you look like an idiot and makes them just pissed off at you. So definitely seen a lot of really dumb stuff. And I try to at least make my opinion known, but this is base jumping and people have the right to do what they want to do as long as they're not grossly endangering their own lives, you know, which we're doing every day anyway, or endangering somebody else's life. I kind of get picky with in Lauterbrunnen or some of the touristy places. You know, it's one thing to think you're being badass and pulling super low and you're the coolest guy in the valley because you're having a 10-second canopy ride. But if you think about an accident in front of a bunch of tourists, that's not cool. You're like going to affect some kid's life because he just watches some dude splatter all over the Swiss Valley and he didn't ask for that. So that's kind of where I draw the line. Where if I see somebody doing something where it's going to like be in tourists' faces, that's not cool at all.
All right, so this is a segment in the show that I call Inappropriate Questions. And I find people that you know and I get them to ask you 3 inappropriate questions. Hopefully they make you feel uncomfortable and they're tough for you to answer. That's the goal.
I'll see if I can actually answer all of them appropriately.
No, you can answer them inappropriately. It does not matter. So I happen to live about 3/4 of a mile from a place called Squirrel Wingsuits. I went up there. I talked to the whole crew at Squirrel, so I got 3 different questions for you. And I think the first one is Mort, and Mort is going to jump in with question number 1.
Hey there, pretty lady. Just wondering what the most inappropriate thing that another man has done to you while drinking.
That's a really good question, and it's scarily enough. That's a long list of things that I got to go through here. I don't know. I got punched in the face by Dukes.
I think he was referring to something that wasn't really punched in your face, but maybe put on your face.
Oh, dude, that's happened multiple times. This is base jumping, man. I don't know. There's maybe some parts here and there that were thrown around in the bar.
Let me see if I can narrow it down for you even more. Something was put on your face by a guy who was on acid and ate his own poop.
Maybe. I can neither confirm nor deny that story, and I'll talk to about that one.
All right. I'll bleep his name out so he doesn't have to deal with that. All right, we are going to go with question number 2, and you know Dave?
Which Dave?
It doesn't even matter.
Hey, Scotty Bob, what's the longest you've been without a shower?
I mean, if you want to go pre-base jumping into the Marine Corps days, that's like even longer. But base jumping wise, I definitely go like a week without taking a shower. That was before I had a stable girlfriend. I definitely take a lot more showers these days.
I can imagine. How about your Marine Corps days? If it was a lot longer, do you go like a month without showering?
Nah, I'd say the longest would be about 3.5 weeks. Oh, pushing a month almost. We didn't really have great showers in Sinjar, so I think the longest was about 3.5 weeks.
Okay. Now, I've got to pull up the third one, so it better work this time. And here's your last one.
Hey, Scotty Bob, it's not actually a question. It's just an innocent statement. Your deep undercover mission will only be complete when we have grandkids. So thanks.
So that was Matt from Squirrel Wingsuits. And what does that even mean? A statement about your mission won't be complete until you have grandkids?
Typical Matt fashion, I think he's being slightly cryptic in the way that we have to survive long enough to have kids and then grandkids.
Well, I think that's a great goal. So you should definitely strive to have grandkids. And I will say that you can look at a lot of people in your sport as having a one-track mind because it's tunnel vision and people can be looked at as selfish. And people say you are the opposite. You're an authority on the sport who's credited with popularizing a new, better way to fly wingsuits. But there's not that much ego to you. And maybe it's because you've always been the same kind of dirtbag who's not afraid to sleep on a couch or do whatever he's got to do to have fun. But it's nice to know a dude like Scotty Bob exists. And I thank you for your time.
Oh, no worries, man. I'm glad to talk to you.
So that was time with Scotty Bob, and for a dude that puts his life on the line on a daily basis, he sure is a chill person. I guess that could come from the military training, though. When you train to jump into combat zones, I'm sure you have to be one of those people that are pretty calm in hectic situations. And that seems to be what Scotty Bob is. One thing I didn't ask Scotty Bob that I really wanted to was about his thoughts on athletes taking a knee. He's a veteran, and his take is one that really matters to me. So I asked him outside of the podcast what he thinks when he sees athletes like Colin Kaepernick take a knee, and here is what Scotty Bob had to say. As a veteran, I'm not offended in the slightest by anyone protesting any injustice in our country. It is a right in a free society for anyone to exercise their First Amendment rights. I find it kind of weird that people who have never served and who claim to be patriotic would decree athletes standing up to injustice, even in such a public fashion. That's a cool perspective from an American hero. Well, I'm not sure he's an American hero at all. He was a combat photographer, for Christ's sakes. But he is a hero in the world of wingsuit flying and has changed the game in the way that people pilot their wingsuits. It's become the standard. A lot of trial and error goes into that. And trial and error is scary when you're talking about wingsuit pilots and base jumping, but that is the life of Scotty Bob. I want to thank you for listening. I also want to ask you to review me on whatever platform you listen to me on, and also to support my great sponsors. They are Evo, Stanley, Spy Optic, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Have a great week, everyone.